Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we are going to be making the winter skating coat, which is this one here with the fur collar in the Luna Lapin range of garments. And this coat has been designed by Sarah Peel of Cool Crafting, and I'll pop a link up here so that you can get your kit or your book for making this lovely coat here. It is in the Luna Lapin and Friends A Year of Making book. So that's the one that looks like this, and you'll be able to get that on their website too. And it features a velvet main body of the jacket, and then it's got this lovely faux fur collar on it. So you'll need to either buy a, sorry for the crinkling, a remake kit, which is what I've got just here, or you'll need to buy a make me kit. So you'll buy a make me kit if you don't have the book, because the pattern will be in the book, so you'll need the pattern with the make me kit. But if you've already got your book, then you can then buy a remake kit, and that will give you everything you need to make the coat except for the pattern. Hope that makes sense. That's the only confusing bit I think sometimes, but once we've got that together, that's fine. And I want to say a really big thank you to Colleen Molson Hughes, who has gifted this kit for me and therefore sponsored this video in order that I can make this tutorial and sew along video for you. So Colleen, I hope you enjoy sewing along with me today, and everybody else who does choose to sew along with the video, then we're all going to give our thanks to Colleen for gifting the kit to me. So thank you, Colleen, for your kindness and your generosity. Okay, I'll tilt the camera down and we'll get started. Okay, so this is future me just popping back to show you the finished coat. We've got a lovely collar. I have changed the closure, but I talk about that in the video. We've got the lovely bow on the back, the lovely pleat. We've got the bias trim on here as well. It probably just needs a little press extra on it, but everything is looking really lovely. So if you're happy with the way that my coat has turned out and you want to do yours exactly the same, and when she sits down it really is lovely and full and just spread out around her, then please carry on watching. And if you can, I'd be really grateful if you give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment as well when you get to the end as to whether you've enjoyed the video or not, because that really does help my channel. And if you're not a subscriber already, I'd really appreciate if you hit that bell because I'm so close to being at 2,000 subscribers. I can almost taste it. So yeah, lovely to have you here, and I hope you enjoy stitching with me today. So within your pack for the winter skating coat, you actually get the fabric to make the actual coat itself, but also the winter dress. So the winter dress is looking like this one, and you can get different colourways. That's why I've got the red colourway. So that's the winter dress, and we'll be doing that at another stage, and that coordinates nicely with the winter skating coat in order that you can have this complete outfit. But for now, we're just going to be doing the coat that we can see here. So this is why you've got extra fabric. So this is the fabric for the winter skating dress, or the winter dress. And then the skating coat is out of the velvet fabric and also the faux fur. And then out of your haberdashery kit, you're also going to need your tartan bow and your tartan bias binding. There is a hook and eye as well that you'll need to add from your stash. Now, the coat is unlined. And I have been asked by one of my followers, Ruth, how we actually line this coat. So I will be looking at that as we go forward in order just to help along with that. But that might be a step too far for some people. So I will be following the instructions for making the coat. And as I go along, I'll then make a decision as to whether or not I do a separate video for how to line it in the future. But or just some tips in order to help that. But if I feel like it's going to be obvious as we go along, then I'll talk about that too. Okay, so we need a small amount of our tartan fabric just for doing the under collar. So we will do that at some stage, just find a little corner somewhere that we can use for that so that it stays out of the way of the main cutting out, so that doesn't get in the way at all. But for now, let's pop that to one side. Pop away our haberdashery for now, and then let's just have a little talk about the faux fur. The faux fur is lovely. It's got this lovely nap to it, and it's a really nice, got a lovely sheen to it. So when we cut this, if you remember when we've cut out the fur for Hamish, we have to cut through this mesh back that it has, but we want to leave the fur overhang intact, because that's what will make the collar lie nice and neatly. So if we look down here, we can see the edge of the, oops, it's a bit slinky. We can see the edge of the fur mesh just there, hopefully, and then you can just see the overhang of the actual fur itself further down. So that's what we want. We want to cut through the mesh but leave these fibres intact. If you just cut through with your scissors like that, you will take off this overhang of fur and it'll be a very blunt edge, and we don't want that blunt edge. We want this lovely soft edge that we can then use to look nice on the fabric. So we'll talk about that as we're going through and we're cutting that out. So let's put that to one side, but that is lovely. And then with velvet, we do have to be careful, because velvet can be one of those fabrics that would be deemed a tricky fabric. We need to be careful when we're pressing it, because sometimes we can press it. If you know with velvet, one way you can smooth it down and it goes lovely and flat. But then if you try and push the other way up, it kind of catches on your fingers, and that's called a nap. So these fibres have all been manufactured so they lay down nice and smoothly one way, but if you try and work with it, you can get these lines in the fabric that I don't know if you can kind of see I'm getting there. So we need to be very careful when we're cutting out this fabric that everything goes one way. So we certainly have to pay attention to our grain lines to make sure that's all going to fit nicely. But the other thing is that I would only press this fabric with a press cloth on the reverse. I'm not going to press this fabric on the top at all, because I think that sometimes you can run the risk of pressing marks into your lovely velvet, and we want this to be lying as lovely and smooth as possible. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is a walking foot. Let me just get mine. This is my takeaway tub that I keep all of my feet in for my machine. Keeps them all nice together. But this is my walking foot. So it's quite clunky, and it has a lever here that moves this mechanism down here. And what that mechanism does is it gives you a serrated edge along here that actually grips the fabric from the top as you're sewing. So we have what are called feed dogs, and that's what these are, normally on the bottom of your machine, where underneath your needle plate, and that will move your fabric through as you're sewing. What this does with the walking foot is it also grabs the fabric from the top, and these serrated edges, or these bumpy edges, grab hold of the fabric from the top, so it moves both layers together at the same time in this kind of a motion, because this lever lifts up and down to grab and release the fabric, and that will give you a much better result. So you will see me using my walking foot. Now a walking foot is about £50 if you get a branded one. That was how much my Janome one was, and it is an investment, but it's great for stretchy fabrics, great for slippery fabrics, and great for fabrics like this so corduroy or velvet that can have a tendency to walk. So as you put your seams together and you try and sew two together, you might find that the top will slip against the bottom and not sit right. Obviously you can tack your fabric, that will also help you. So if you've not got the funds at the moment to have a walking foot, or you've not got one, then tacking with smallish stitches is going to be your friend to hold that fabric in place for you. And that'll hold it in place more so than pins will do. But if not, then we're going to use a walking foot, and hopefully that's going to make sewing through this fabric a breeze for us. Okay, so let's then talk about the pattern. Okay, so if you have a look in your book, then you're going to need pages 124, 25, 26 and 27, and then it goes on to 28 as well. So there are a few, the sleeves just on this 128 as I can see. So what we're going to do is we need to get some tracing paper, and then we're going to trace over these patterns here. You can also go onto the publisher's website and you can trace you can get the print out of the patterns from there as well. And that sometimes that's better to cut it out or to print it out onto photocopier paper, and it's easier than tracing out of the book. But I will be tracing out of the book for this one. So I'll just get my tracing paper, and then we'll start to trace those off, and we'll be ready to go. So just pick up tracing paper. You get it from a arts and crafts shop, or you can get it from a stationer's. And all I'm going to do is lay my tracing paper over the top of my pattern piece, and then very carefully just draw over these edges. I tried to do some corners first just to sort of give me a bit of a straight line to work with, but then I can then trace over these lines very carefully and as accurately as possible in order to get me the pieces that I need. And I need to pay attention to any, and I'd ask you to do the same, any markings on the thing. I don't generally do the stitch line. I mean, you can draw the stitch line in if you want to, but generally that's around the 1/4 inch mark on most of this. So let's just have a quick look and just see if that's the same. Yeah, it's 1/4 inch seam allowance on there anyway. So I'm going to, this is the back neck facing, so make sure you write on it what it is, and then just pay attention, because if there's any marks like your fold line, then you need to put those on as well, and what it is, and then just draw that out. So go ahead and trace off all of your pattern pieces, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll talk about, also press your fabric for me as well, and then we'll be, also my throat's gone funny, hasn't it? And then we're going to come back here and talk about cutting out the fabric. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces now traced and cut off. Now the one thing that I have done is, just to make it easier when we're cutting out so that we can then cut out with confidence, is that where there's a couple of items that say to cut for. One of them is the side panel and the other is the front and the front facing. So on each of those pieces I've actually cut out 2 of those. So I've got 2 pieces for my front and front facing, and I'll cut it on the double, so that'll be 2 of those, that'll be 4 in total of that. And the same with the front and the front facing, I'll also cut out 2 of each of those of the pattern pieces, and that will give me my 4 without me having to kind of guesstimate whether I've got the right amount of fabric or not. So that then should help. We've then got also the under collar and the upper collar, and those are one's out of fur and one's out of our tartan fabrics. Let's just keep that to one side because we don't need that cutting out of our velvet. The back facing we will need cutting out of our velvet, so we'll keep that together. The skating sleeve we will need, and then also this funny shaped piece, which is the back piece here, because there's a beautiful big pleat in the back of this skirt of the coat that we're going to be cutting out, so we need that one too. So let's just pop all of this to one side, because the next thing I need to do is just to have a look at my velvet and just to see if I do feel I need that to be ironed. It's not too bad, but yeah, we've got some packing creases in there, so I probably will just take this over and get this pressed. It's a nice long width of fabric. We can tell it's width of fabric because we've got the selvage edge onto both edges here, which is fine. And I'll just have a quick trial. So we need to just work out which is our right side and our wrong side. So run your hand along it, and one direction should be very smooth and the other you should sort of get these ruckles going up. So we want everything to be smoothed down. So I've got it the right way up at the moment. And then I just want to have a look and see how much fabric we've got. Yes, I'm jumping ahead, but I'll come back to it all in a second. So let me just turn it over this way because that back wants to be turned over the other way. So first thing I'm going to do is place my fold pieces. So we need the back piece put on the fold. So I've got that towards there, and the back facing is just going to slot into just there. And then these here. Now, you're going to be tempted, because there's a lot of waste of the fabric here, to turn one of these upside down, but you really can't. You've got to have all of these facing the same way. The other thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is that we don't have any grain lines on these pattern pieces at all. So these have all got to be placed together facing down, and we've got to manage to fit our sleeve in. So I think I'm going to move this one up here and this one up here, and I'll have those hem edges touching. Let's move that one along there, that one along there, and then that's going to give us room to be able to fit our sleeve in. Lot of wasted fabric here just because of the nature of velvet, but that's so true. So if you're ever trying to make a garment for yourself or a child and it's not been designed for velvet, just remember you need to keep all of these pattern pieces this direction with the towards the neck edge at the top and the hem edge down to the bottom. Otherwise you'll get a difference in your colour because you'll have one fabric going the wrong way when you try to smooth it down, and it won't work for you. It's called having a nap. Not having a sleep nap. The fabric has a nap, which is that kind of way that it just only can lie one way smoothly. Okay, so I'm just going to take this over to my iron. I'm going to get my ironing board out and just going to press this. I'm going to press it from the wrong side. Generally, you can actually buy a pressing mat specifically for velvet, which has like a velour feel to it, because we don't want to crush any of these fibres. So I am going to iron it quite gently and probably just use the steam more than anything else, just to get these very fine creases out. They probably wouldn't matter too much, but let's just be thorough and get that done. Then, because we know that we can get all this garment onto this fabric, then we're going to be working with that just to make it work as best as we can for us. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Okay, a couple of minutes later, so I've just got my back piece here, and I'm going to move this down to the bottom so it gives us as much room as we have for the facing there, and I'm going to place that fold line absolutely onto the edge just there, and put a pin top and bottom just to start us off. I've gone right down to the bottom of the fabric because I'm right on the fold, and I know that those fabric pieces are right on top of each other, so I know I'm not going to have a little jog in my fabric where it's not matched up properly. So let's just pin this piece on first, and generally I will pin down the pieces that are needing to be cut on the fold first, because they're the most difficult to place, because you need to have that folded edge and sufficient of a folded edge to be able to cut those out accurately. If ever you find as well, just a quick tip, if ever you find that you've cut something or you've used up all your fold and you've not got anything left, you can move this in slightly. You've just got to allow a seam allowance so that you can then, so this is only if you've made a mistake. I don't want to confuse everybody. If you've got in a fold, then you can place your pattern piece on the fold. But if ever you're working with a piece of fabric and you haven't got a fold edge, then just allow an extra seam allowance on the edge of your fabric and cut out the two. And then the first thing you should do is sew that at whatever seam allowance you've allowed, whether it's 1/4 of an inch, and just put those two pieces together, and then you'll have it back again. So don't think all is lost if you can't do that. Now we're at the top here, and I've got a slight difference on the top edge of my fabric here, so I need to make sure that when I'm placing this pattern piece on the fold that I've got enough room there to just pop that down, and for it not to cut off a little bit of it because of it being at the top, uneven at the top. That's what I'm trying to say. So we've got that piece on there, and I'll be careful when we cut that out. So that's those two fold pieces on there first. And then hopefully, as I said before, it starts to become easier to see, because if you've only got one piece of these two pattern pieces, you've then got to sort of put them on your fabric, but then you've got to move them along as well to cut out the extra. And by having an extra copy of each straight away, then I know I can pop these onto my fabric. And I am cutting this out on the double so we get the left and the right, so just be aware of that. Now, because this has got a straight edge just here, I'm going to take this one and I'm going to pop that down on this edge just here. Oh, I wonder if I could tip that over there and cut two like that and two like that, and that might save some fabric. I think it might. So all I've done is I've flipped over one of the front facing pieces. I'm going to pop that down onto my fabric, and I'm going to use the front edge as being my straight of grain. Just be careful not to cut into your selvage edge, because that will show on your fabric if you do that. Just move that piece along. But it allows me to butt these two pieces, pattern pieces, up to each other. There are no grain lines to match up, so we don't need to do that measuring. We just need to try and get them as straight as we can do. So let me just roughly place these on for now. You don't need to see me pinning everything in place, but then it will just give you a little bit of a clue. There is a cutting layout. Oh, and actually Sarah does it that way too on hers, in order to cut out the most, get the most out of the fabric. That's good. Great minds think alike. So let's just pop this on here. So that's got those two pieces cut out just there. Or not cut out, just roughly pinned on there. And then we've got two pieces here as well that are going to need to be straight. So I'm going to take one down to the bottom here. Again, I'm just eyeballing it straight, just roughly down the centre of that bodice piece just there, just to give us some idea. And then if I'm careful at the top here, we can take that one slightly up, which will save us a little bit more fabric. Keep that one fairly straight, and that will help too. And then we're just looking for where we can place our sleeve to get that cut out, and that will actually fit in down here just nicely. How far down can we go? So it gives us a nice bit of fabric just here that we can use for something else at some stage, embellishing another garment, that type of thing. Right, so this is the layout I'm going to use for mine. Sarah's got another layout in the book just here for you. Sarah Peel, the designer, that is. I'll just show you, she's got hers just there, but not dissimilar. Follow whichever you like, just make sure that you've got enough room to cut out the 4 of the panels and the 4 of the facings. Otherwise you'll come unstuck when we get to later on. And then once you've got all these laid out and you're happy with where they are, then we're going to cut these out of our velvet fabric and then pop these to one side, and we'll mark up any notches, because then we'll go on to the collar and the under collar and we'll cut those out next. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces all cut out here. Now let's get the under collar. So there is a difference between the under collar and the upper collar. If I just put those two pieces on top of each other, can you see there's quite a difference there? So make sure you get the right one. So you need your under collar first, and that's going to be cut out of this tartan. Oops, I've wafted it off the bottom of my table. So you're going to be working with the under collar first, and when I've looked at the fabric layout for the winter dress in here, in the book, then I can see that at this top corner here, opposite to the fold, there's quite a spare area just there. There is the collars just in there, but I think that if I just tuck that under collar in there, then we should be fine, and that should give us enough fabric. Normally, as you know, I would say don't cut anything out of a fabric until you've actually got all of your pattern pieces on, but because I want to cut this out and get this jacket done first, the coat done first, then that's what we need to do. So I'm just making sure that the tartan is on top of each other and that we've got all the fold all straight, because that's how we will want it when we're cutting out our actual fabric. And this one again likes to hold on to itself. So match up your selvage edge first, and if you can, fold back the edge so you can see one of the lines of the tartan, and then you can just pop that on top so that you can make sure that that's as straight as it can be. And then after you've collected your pattern piece that has wafted from under the table, then we're going to pay attention to the arrow for the direction on the fabric, and I am tucking this under collar piece, making sure that that's straight at the top there. I'm going to have that just there, and I'm going to pin that onto my fabric. And then I'm going to cut this piece out, and then I'll move on then to the fur with the fur, I'm going to lie it in front of me so that the nap, the actual grain of the fur, is coming down towards me, and then I'm just going to flip it over. And I know that the fur's coming down towards me because at the bottom I've got that little fur overhang of those fibres. I'm then going to find my chalk pencil, and that's this one by Sewalong, which is really nice, got a nice narrow point on it. And let's find our pattern piece, because we need to cut 2 with the fur coming down towards the bottom. So let's go down towards the bottom of this piece just here. Oh no, let's start at the top. Shall we start we'll start at the top. Talk myself into it and out of it. So I'm going to put this one on first. Again, you could have cut this out twice if you wanted to, because we've got to cut this out on the single. But we've got to be really careful with this, because we can't cut one out that way and do the same. We've got to actually mirror this piece, so we've got a left and a right. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is, and I would never cut fur straight out just from the pattern piece, because it's just too fiddly to try and pay attention to your pattern piece and to your line of your fabric. And I'm just going round this pattern piece with a chalk pencil. If you haven't got a chalk pencil, you could always do some little tacking stitches around the edge of your pattern piece in a different colour, and then use that as your outline to cut around. It'll just help you if you've not got a chalk pencil, and some people have, some people haven't. It's very difficult to mark up on light fabric and dark fabric if you've not got something like that to work with. Makes a great birthday present or a just because present, and this one's really nice. Okay, so that's got that one marked out, and I've got the grain of the fabric of the fur coming down. That's the down. So now that's my first one just marked on there, look, with that chalk pencil. So now I'm going to flip my pattern over so that this is going to be the other side of my collar piece. So I'm going to go up to the top again. I need to look and make sure that this line is following down the line of the fabric. Pull it down slightly and then pin it on. If you're not careful, it will be so easy to cut out 2 right or 2 left of your collar piece, and you need 1 left and 1 right. So you have to do this mirroring. You have to flick your pattern piece over. So now, again, this is why I do it before, trace it out as well, so that we can make sure we've got everything right. Because this here is the back of the neck, so those 2 pieces are going to join together at the back of the neck when we actually sew this together. So in that way, you know then that you need to have this 1 left and 1 right. And sometimes it's the little instructions like that that get lost in the written word of the instructions, I think, because you can think, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing with this, I'll just cut them out, and you know, we get distracted by the kids or by TV or by whatever, piece of chocolate, whatever, and we then forget that one important thing. And there isn't enough felt if you go fur that if you go wrong you can correct it. So please just double check with this fur that you've got it the right way. Okay, once we've got that sorted, let's take our pattern pieces off, and we just make sure that we've got one coming into from the left and coming into the right, and that one there going round the other way. So that's fine. Now I'm going to use my snips to cut this, but if you've got some lovely little embroidery scissors, then they would also make a really good way of snipping this. Because when you cut faux fur, and I have got a tutorial on my channel about how to cut faux fur for when I was doing Hamish's fur for his head, because you need to know how to do that. You've got to use the point of your snips to part through these fibres when you're snipping, because otherwise you're going to cut those off and it will give you a sharp edge, and we want a really soft edge like we've got at the bottom here. So this will take you some time. Don't rush this stage. So when you're ready, I'm starting on the edge and I'm going to use my scissors, and I just sort of part through the fur before I make a snip, and then I use it again very carefully, as you can probably tell, and we're going to part through the fur. So I'm feeling the blade on the edge of that mesh at the back of the fabric, at the back of the fur. So I'm just literally going the other side of that, and then I'm running my snips almost just a few millimetres at a time just through that mesh, because when we pull it apart we want that fur is kept to one side on the edge there. I know I'm making it look really, really tricky, and I don't mean to, but I am really, really, really being that careful just to try and get this cut as effectively as possible. And if you've got little, as I say, those little embroidery scissors with the nice sharp noses, they're really good. So if I hold that back, can you see how I've managed to cut that now with the overhang of the fur? And then if we look onto here, we've got that fur. We haven't got a sharp edge on here. We've got that cut off, and there's hardly anything on my desk, so there's not much dropping down because we're cutting in between those fibres. So let's change direction, and some directions are easier than others, and run your blade just through a little bit just to start you off. Almost like the blades of the scissors are just slightly turned upwards into that mesh, into that fur, and then you can just cut a little bit at a time. So I'm not going to sit and let you watch me do this, but hopefully I've shown you how carefully I will be cutting through this just to keep that fur as intact as possible without, and it is worth it. This is worth, some things aren't worth the time, but this is definitely worth your time that you take to cut this out, because that collar is front and central and is so, so important to the finished effect of this dress, of this coat. Okay, I'll be back to you when I've cut these two pieces out, and we'll start construction. Oh no, we'll be doing notches and tailor's tacks first, then we'll do construction. Okay, so let's have a go at doing some notches and sorting out what we've got here. So let's have a look on our sleeve piece first, and we've got a notch at the top here. So when we do a notch, we're going to just use the point of our scissors or our snips, and we're just going to snip a couple of millimetres into that piece of fabric, just so it gives that little cut that just looks very deliberate. Okay, so that's one little notch just there, that's fine. So on this side piece, we've got two notches on this princess seam, and they're called a princess seam because they curve in opposite directions before you then join them together. So that's a match point on there. So pop that one out of the way. Let's do this other one as well. So I'm just, again, right on top of those notches, just at right angles to the seam line, just doing that little notch. You just need to make sure you don't go any further than your seam allowance amount. So we've got a quarter of an inch seam allowance on our stitches, so we just need to make sure we don't go past that. And normally a couple of millimetres is enough just to see that that's a deliberate snip mark. Then again on here, so I'm just working through each of the pieces in turn, and you'll notice I've left the back piece to the last. And on the neck facing, they want you to just do one on the neck edge, just on that fold line. So that's that. There's two on here, just so that those match. The back of the collar just there. Now on the fur collar, haven't copied my notches across. That's a good idea, Claire, wasn't it? So let me just have a quick look in my pattern and put those notches on. So if you've missed any, just go back, and then you can just lay your pattern piece back over your fabric, over your pattern, and then we can just draw those notches in where they're supposed to be. So I missed out those two on the bottom there for the upper collar. So now I can lay that, just put those little snips in there just so I can see where they are, because I'm not going to notch these on my fur. I'm going to use my chalk pencil and just put a mark in the middle of each of those, and that then just gives me my notches just on there like that. Hopefully you can see. Apologies if you can hear my husband in the background, he's on a conference call, but I really want to get this video made, and if I wait until he's finished, we'll be on to tea time, and then I'll have procrastinated more and we'll be out of time. So I'm going to crack on and hope you can't hear it. So that's the collar there. Right, now on this one here, this is the back piece. We've actually got a dot here, and I'm going to do a tailor's tack there. If anybody's watched my videos before, you know I'm a fan of a tailor's tack. And all I've got is I've got a hand sewing needle threaded with a double string of a contrast colour. This time I'm using yellow. And wherever your dot is, imagine yourself that's the centre of a compass. And I'm going to go east to west first, and you need to go all the way through your fabric, so your needle goes all the way through. Doesn't matter if you go a little bit wider. It's the centre of the dot that's going to be important. And then I want you to leave a tail with a couple of inches of thread. And then I want you to take another stitch, north to south, or in this case south to north, but you know what I mean. And then you're going to pull that until your loop is about the same length as your tail. And you can cut through the loop to make that single, and then cut off your thread as well. So in the end, you end up with this tuft of threads. But if we look on the other side, we've got a nice little cross, or normally a nice little cross. This again just shows you how this velvet just moves on you. So a nice little cross at the back just there. I'm now going to do a little snip, and I'm going to do a snip right on the back of the fold. So that's just taken that snip into that fold. And also where this dotted line is for the back of the fold as well. So let's do a dotted line for there. And do a little snip into that. But then the other thing that I found really useful when I was making, what was I making? Something, one of Luna Lapin's outfits somewhere. And I did a threaded, a thread line down the pattern where the fold line was going to be for the pleat, and it worked really well. So I'm going to do that again. So let's just take a few fairly large stitches. You don't need to put a knot at the end. It's just going to be a loose row of stitching just down this creased line, this outer one. So if you look, I'm just doing this one just here, not that one just there. I've notched that one at the top, but this one just down here. Whether my thread's long enough, I probably should have had a longer piece of thread. I changed my mind halfway through what I'm doing, and I think, well, what's going to be useful for you when you're at home making these? And try and just think how we can make it better for you. So I'm going down as far as I can do until all of my thread is used up. I'm not going to do a little reverse stitch at the end. We don't need to worry about that. And I'm just going to snip my needle off my thread. So I've got my needle off my thread now. Put that out of the way. And then where you've got all of these little loops for the stitches, I'm going to just snip through those. Hoping this is going to work. If you've got a longer piece of thread than me, leave a longer loop than I have on each of these stitches. I might have to go back and do it again because it might pull out. Might not be long enough. And then what we can do is just loosen off these pins for now. Again, make sure you get them in your pin cushion so that they don't get tangled up inside your stitching it. Oh, we've got a couple more snips because on this princess seam at the back here. Just do those. Because then what we're going to do then is just ease this pattern piece off. Hold on to your thread so you don't pull those out. And can you see how we've got a nice long line of that edge being marked, and the same on the back. Now, if we'd have left loops in each of these, it would be slightly easier to do this next stage. But what we're going to do is just going to start and pull these threads apart, but then you're going to try and cut through so that you've got leaving a little bit of thread on each side. You've got to be really careful. Just hold that up like that. Really careful not to snip your fabric. Now, luckily your velvet is quite stiff, and you might be a bit heavy-handed and pull it out for some of them. And as I say, if you've got a longer thread left, you'll do better with this. But it's just going to mark that fold line for you so that when you come to iron it, it will be marked for you, and you can fold it over to that mark and then press with confidence. So all the way up the top here, just nice and steady. So you've got the threads coming through the back here and through the front. We will have to be careful while we're working with this fabric, but that's okay. We've got to be careful with it anyway. So then we're coming up towards where the tailor's tack is. We can be a little bit more rough with that. So once we get to the tailor's tack, we're going to pull that until you've got a bridge of threads like this, okay, between the front and the back. And because we left those longer, you can see how if you've left these longer, you'd be better. And then we can then just snip through those threads, and that then gives us 2 pieces of fabric. And this is the depth of the pleat here. It's quite a deep pleat, but I've got a line of threads down in these 2 places here, and my tailor's tack. Let me hold it up so you can see. So I've got a row of threads here, see them that way, and then the other side of the threads is giving me my row just down here. Okay, so that's going to just help us mark everything out as we're working with it, and we've got our tailor's tack. So let's just pop that back onto here for now. And I think that's all. We've got all of our notches, we've got everything all marked up. So let me get my sewing machine set up. I'm going to get it set up with my walking foot on, and the thread I've chosen is this wine colour here. Now if you're in choosing threads, because I did look at this colour thread as well, did look at this colour thread here, which also looked quite nice, but if I put these 2 against the fabric and show you, either would do nicely. But the rule of thumb when choosing threads is if you haven't got the exact same thread colour, go for the darkest one, or if you've got 2, go for the slightly darker one, because the darker one won't show up quite as much as the lighter one does, and hopefully you can see that on there. So I am going to go for this darker wine coloured thread. So let me get my bobbin set up as well and get my walking foot on, and then we'll be ready to sew. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be doing is working with this back piece. So I'm just going to remove the pattern piece for that, and just make sure you keep that somewhere nice and safe. Because what I want you to do now is to match up this point here at the centre of the back of the neck. And we're going to put a pin in, just to hold that. And just try and get, if you normally take quite a big bite of your fabric when you're pinning, because we're working with velvet, just try and take a small amount so that we're nice and precise and it's not giving much room for that to move. The next thing I want you to do is go down to your pin, and I want to your notch, sorry, your tailor's tack, and put a pin in there as well. And then once we've got our top and our bottom sorted out, just make sure that they're all lined up perfectly, because again, this fabric likes to move as you're working with it. Just make sure that's better, okay? And then we're going to just take a few more pins, and we're just going to just put this into place down here, just taking those small bites with our pins just to make sure that that's got that nicely. And then we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew all the way down, and we're going to finish on the top of the tailor's tack. Okay, so I've got my machine set up with my walking foot here, quite a big bulky piece of contraption here, and it is quite noisy. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then we're going to then put our needle in the work in order that then, I'll just take that pin out first, that then we can hold on to our fabric as we're going down. So now I'm just going to sew down nice and steadily until we get to those pins, and then take them out. So my needle's in the work, holding my fabric together whilst I come down. And then I'm going to stop. So try and leave the pins in to the last minute with velvet, and then reverse on that. That was the wrong button. Bear with me a second, and reverse on the back there. Okay, so I have gone 1 stitch past my notch, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. You'll end on yours perfectly. Take off our starting and finishing threads, and there we've got our seam sewn just down there. You can see how it wants to bunch up slightly. Let's open it and have a look. But it's lying lovely and flat on the back there when we open that up, if you can see. Just the fabric and the sheens, that's all looking nice. So we've stopped just there. So now what I can do is just take out my tailor's tack now, because we have finished with that. It marked the spot we needed to finish on. And some people like to mark with a Frixion pen, but I just like my tailor's tacks. They just work really well, and I've got no issue about the ink possibly damaging the fabric at all. But you can do whatever you like. I won't be there to see. So you can do what you like. Let's just pull out this tailor's tack. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use one of my words, which is a smoosh, and we're going to take the notch that we did at the centre of that pleat at the back there, and we're going to open up this seam allowance here, and we're going to put that notch so that it lies directly on top of that seam allowance. So you want the top of the edges of your pleat to be level, and then once you've smooshed that down so that you've got your point right on the back just there, you're then going to put a pin in just to hold that. And when you look, you should have your little notches that you cut on the very outside edges of that pleat. And then when we fold this down, look at it from the back, what we're wanting is that the two edges with the marked thread lines are going to come together perfectly to give us that black back pleat down the back there, just like that. Okay, so that's right. Now let's have a look and see what we're wanting to do next. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to press this pleat. So where you've got your tacked line with those edges, I'm just going to put a just a pin just holding that flat for me, just on that hemline. So inside what would be the hem, because that's going to help us just keep that all nice and neat at the bottom. And it's not going to mark our fabric because we're going to have it inside the hemline. So they've just got those two pins there, look, just holding that flat so that the stitch line that we did, that tacked line, is just on the edge. And if we turn this over, we should then be able to put this together so that that line that we drew with those threads just lies nice and flat inside. And if you feel with your fingers, you can just feel to make sure that fabric's not overlapping at all and that it's just lying flat. Then I want you to get your press cloth. I'm going to use a silk organza one, but you could use a tea towel or a lawn handkerchief, anything like that, or a little bit of scrap fabric. And then we're going to, with steam, we're just going to gently just press this pleat in place, just so that it sits nicely where it should do. I'm not leaving the iron in any one place to mark the fabric, but we just want to just take that down. And then let's have a little look on the other side, and we can see how that is starting to just give that fabric a memory fold on that edge. Okay, I'm happy with that. We've got the pin at the top just there, and whilst I'm here, I am just going to press the seam open on the centre of the back as well. So again, I'm going to use my press cloth because we're working with a polyester fabric and it just takes the heat out of that iron. It's just going to just press that open at the back there, just so that that stays nice and open there. Okay, now it does say that we don't sew down this back of this pleat, because the temptation is now just to go to the sewing machine and just to sew this across, but it says not to do that until we've actually done the side seams. So shall I do as I'm told for a change and do that? So first thing we're going to do now is going to locate one set of our side panel. If you remember, we've got two sets of side panel. So here's my two sets of side panel. So I'm just going to use one of them. Let's take our pins out. Just make sure you've got your notches marked before you take your pins out. pattern piece, put that somewhere safe. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at sewing our princess seams. So we're going to take one of these in turn and we're going to put it right sides down onto our pattern piece. But you're looking for this curve here because this is going to form part of the underarm here. But we're wanting that curve there. So we're going to put one pin at the top. So you're not matching your curve at the top of your shoulder, you're matching it at this underarm point just here. So let's just pop that in place just there and pop a pin in. And princess seams are one of those things because you've got two curves going in opposite directions. And then we need to find our notches on this edge and we're going to pop that together. And then we're going to put a little pin by our notch because the notches are really important on a princess seam that they match because that helps with the curve. And then we're going to find our next notch further down and we're going to put our pin in just there as well. So just be careful and just take that little bite of fabric. So the problem is with that one is it's not wanting to sit nicely at the very top there. So if you can see, I've got a real light bubble of fabric just at the top just there. Can you see? This one's sitting down nicely. Maybe it's wanting you to go 1/4 centimetre up. Okay, it's just because it's got a little tag for the seam allowance, but you're wanting your raw edges to go together. So make sure you pin those raw edges together. As we go down, that will be fine. So there's a few pins going on here, and if you want to tack because you're using an ordinary presser foot on your machine, then please go ahead and do so. Because as you start to use this, you'll see how floppy the fabric is and how it can just move when you start to sew it. As I say, taking those little bites with your pins will also help just hold it together, as will using more pins. But there's nothing wrong with just taking your time and just tacking these seams if you want to. Okay, so there we are. So how many pins have I got in there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's quite a lot for me. But as you can see, when you're trying to pin this, can you see how this edge here is trying to flick up all the time, and we've got all of those little creases on the edge of the seam? That's absolutely right for a princess seam. That is what happens because you put in two opposite curves. You put in this curve here that comes out against this curve here that goes in, so that's why it goes different. It just was one set, but when you hold it out and hold it flat, once that's stitched down, it gives you this lovely shape that will, and the princess seams are used a lot over bust lines or over backs as well, and as we're working on the back of this jacket, this coat. And I'm just going to work with one side at a time. This is not a time to be jumping ahead and start pinning everything. If you're tacking, go ahead and tack in advance, but if you're pinning, then I would wait. But I've got just a little noggin just over the top of the seam just there, look, when it's lying flat, so it's not quite flat. And I'm going to put the curvier side against the feed dogs of my machine, and I'm going to move my needle across as well because I think I need that control. Okay, so let's do a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back just to anchor that thread on our 1/4 inch seam allowance. That pin can come out to start off with, and let's put a needle in our work because then we can work hands free. And we're going to take it nice and steady because these seams are tiny. And we're just going to keep sewing down. And if we have to, we will go back and hand sew this if we can't do it quite so well. Just make sure everything's all going off okay underneath. Use your fingers. Keep your foot away from your pedal while you're feeling with your fingers though. We don't want any trips to A&E. And then we're just going to work our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you get onto the skirt, it's not so bad. But if your fabric starts to rock up under the presser foot, just take a moment to just lift up your presser foot and just to ease things out just as you're going down. And then just reverse on the end of the hem as well. Take our threads out, find our snips, and I'll have a little look on that and see how that is sitting. Okay, so there's our first one in, and we can see that we've sewn that curve in nicely, and that's going all the way down to the bottom. So I'm going to do the same now with the other one. So lay it down so you've got your right side of your fabric up, and then you're going to take your other side piece, and then it's this curve here that we're working with, not the armhole. Because can you see how that continuation of this curve just here has carried on down from this armhole here and extended that down? That's exactly what we're wanting to achieve. So let's go again. Let's match up our notches first. I think works well. So the top notch with the top notch. Let's put our pin in just there. That gives us a good starting point. Little bite. Then let's find our bottom notch and pop that on top of each other and put that into place. Just be careful with your pins. If they don't want to go through, give them a little twist and they should then go through. And then let's go down to the hem and get that matched up. Let's do the easy bits first, hey? That makes sense, doesn't it? And then let's just work up this skirt now, because that should just all lay on top of each other now, just all nicely. And the walking foot is working nicely with this velvet, so I'm happy with that. I know it's an investment, it's a lot of money, isn't it, for one of these feet, but I use mine quite a lot. It's great with the boucle for bramble, and it's also fabulous for working with slippery fabrics as well. So when we get on to doing Freya's play suit and her opera coat, it'll be great for that as well as this velvet. Works great with corduroy, denim as well. If you're working with shortening trousers, things like that, then it can work well. So now what I'm doing now is, because we've got a curve coming this way and a curve going that way. Can you see? I don't know if you can see that on there. So now we're just wanting to fold one across the other and sort of move it in. But the edges will want to pucker up. That's fine. That's okay. And we've just got that little bit of a dog ear just above the top. I don't mind about that. Let's just put one in the centre just there, because it's the stitching line that's got to match up. So again, plenty of pins in, looks like quite a few, and if you want to just go and tack, you only need to tack really to that bottom notch, I think, and then you'd be able to then use pins going down, but it's up to you what you would want to do. And I'm going to sew this one from the bottom up this time, so that I've got that curvy side again against the feed dogs. So let me just get my foot pedal in place. It's got caught. And this is why I put my pins out, my pin heads out to the side over my seam, because if they're on the inside I wouldn't be able to get to them, but because they're poking out then I can see those quite nicely. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to anchor those threads, and then needle in the work. And then I can take my first pin out. Just make sure your edges are together. And I'm actually sewing mine with just one of my feet of my press dogs onto the fabric, not onto the other one, so not all the way across, so that I got more control. Up to the next one, let's take that pin out. I try and remember to stop to take my pins out, just so that we don't pull on the fabric by mistake. Just following the curve of the cut edge. There's lots of shaping on this coat, just make sure everything's all lying nice and flat for you. Get that next pin out. Up to the bottom notch now. So just take your time. So I'm not going to take that pin out just yet and get a bit closer to it first. Then I can take it out. I'm just going to lift up my presser foot and just make sure that I've got my raw edges together, just pulling on the fabric underneath just to make sure that's lying nice and flat. Any kind of ruckles you want to sort of take out to this side here so that when you're sewing around this princess seam, it's all lying as flat as possible. Just keep that curve in by using the seam allowance. I'm just going to lift my presser foot up again and just ease some of this fabric where we've got the ruckles here, just to make sure. That's just because we're going round this curve. Pull that foot out, pull and pin out, and then nice and gently round this other curve. And reverse at the end. And anything like this, it's always a bit of keep your fingers crossed as well, and hopefully we've done all right. So if you look on this side, can you see how that edge there is just puckering? That's right. That's what you will see on a princess seam edge, because it's where the sewing line meets that it needs to be perfect. And then when we fold it out, look at that, that's all nicely stitched there without any puckers in there at all. If you have got a pucker, just go back and just undo your stitches either side, and then just try and smooth that through and re-stitch. As long as you join your stitches beyond the stitch line, so you kind of go over where you've already stitched. So although you take out, say, that much of stitching, you'll actually overlap your stitches by that much, so that you've got an overlap either side, and then it should stop you having to keep reversing all the time. And then on the back of this pleat, we are going to be pressing these seams open on the back here, but on the back of this pleat we can now just go and sew across, because what will happen is we will be sewing our bow onto the back of our coat just there, so that will hide the stitching line of stitching this pleat down. Because if you look, you've got your two edges of your pleat just here at the back. So princess seams are done. In order for them just to sit nicely now, we do need to just snip them. So what I would do is just take your snips, and you're just going to snip through both sides of your fabric, up to but not through your stitches, your stitch line, all the way along that edge. And that will help that seam lie flat when we come to press it. So let's just do the same on this side. So just at right angles to your stitch line, so as if you're doing a notch, but just slightly deeper than that now. Make sure you've not got any fabric underneath that you're cutting into by mistake, and it just helps that seam just lie flatter when you come to actually press that down. Okay, so let's just do this this pleat. Let's put a pin either side just to hold it in place for us so it doesn't walk. This fabric tends to just shift if you're not careful. And then lining your machine up again, making sure you've got your side panels out, keep your seam allowances out of the way. Make sure everything's all nice and flat. Just do a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then take the pin out and put the needle in the work, just so we can adjust everything. And I'm just going to go all the way across the back of this pleat. And reverse at the end. Needle out of the work. And then we can just take these threads off from the other side as well. So that's what that looks like on this side. That's where our pleat is starting. Look, so I've just gone a little bit above that. And that's what it looks like from the inside, where I've just pressed that pleat down. Okay. So now we can take this over to the ironing mat. I'll get mine again. Oh, leaning backwards. And get our iron. And our pressing cloth too, wherever I've put mine. And then I'm just going to press this seam flat first, which is a good dressmaking technique. It just means to just set those stitches. Just be careful at the top here because it is quite curvy. Let's turn it over the other way and probably be a little bit easier just to set those stitches. And I'm not going to iron mine from the top at all. I'm just going to press this open now using the press cloth. And that's why I like the silk organza, because you can see straight through it. So there we go. Oh, that's closed up again. Just go onto the back here and just press that open as well. And you should see where those, by snipping that seam allowance, it should just allow it just to lie flat and nicely. That just sits like that. So I can do the other side. And then let's just reinstate that crease on the bottom, being as we've been working with that. Make sure that's nice and flat on the bottom there. And then I'm just going to give that another press as well. Just whilst we're here, we might as well. So I'm pressing rather than ironing. So I'm just lifting my iron up and down rather than trying to move it along. Okay, I'm going to take those pins out of the hem now because they've done their job, and that's all nice. And that's the back of our coat all sorted. So I think the only thing is that's really tricky with that, well, there's two things. The first thing is remembering that that curve there is a continuation. So when you add your side panel on, so there's the junction, you're continuing your side seam, because it'd be very tempted to think that the side panel goes right up to the shoulder, and it doesn't. So that's your shoulders for going over Luna's shoulders. So you're fixing it sort of like halfway down the pattern piece there, and the fabric piece. But then when you're actually sewing this section here, you've got the curves going the opposite direction. So use plenty of pins just there, and as I say, you can tack that if you need to. But the effect that you're looking to get is this here, where you've got a curve coming in from one side and a curve coming in from the other, and this is the back of the neck and your two shoulders there. And then we've got our lovely pleat on the back here for the back of our dress, and we've got all of our nap for our velvet is all running down this coat as well to make it nice, so we know we cut it out correctly as well. Okay, I'm just going to leave that flat somewhere, and we're going to work on the front pattern pieces. So let's find our two fronts. There's one, there's the other, or two sets of fronts because we've got two in each piece. And let's get our remaining side panel here because we're going to be using with that. So let's just take one set of fronts first and put the other one to the one side. Now we have got some dots on here, but I've not bothered to mark those just because that's the placement for your hook and eye for closing of the skating coat. And I'm not sure that you need to have that marked, so that's why I've not marked it. But if you want to mark that with the tailor's tack, then please do go ahead and do that. So we made sure we've got our notches marked on here, and we have one there and one there, that's fine. And then let's just take these pins out. We'll be using some of these pins anyway. And the first thing I'm going to do is just put the pattern piece away somewhere safe. And then we're going to open these two out so that we've got the right sides up. So there's, we've got our two pieces. So this is going to be our neckline here, where that's scooping round there, and this is the start of our arm, but we need that side panel to continue that armhole down, and that's where this piece comes in. So let's just make sure we've got our notches marked on here, because notches are really important on princess seams. Pattern piece out of the way again. Just chuck it under there for now. I'll find a freezer bag for it later. And then we're going to take each of our curve seams. So this might be interesting. So if you remember that that's got to be a continuation of the armhole. So when we put these down, you want it to go like that, so that when you look at it, your armhole is going to be continued. So this super curvy bit at the top is going to slot into this bit just here. So that's how we know we've got it the right way round. Because if you had it that way, you could see that you wouldn't be able to get that continuation of your curve for your side piece. So let's make sure we've got those to the right sides first, and then once we're sure that we're going to continue that armhole edge down, we can now take one of our front pieces and flip it over so we've got the right sides together. Then I'm going to pick each one up separately, find my first notch at the top on each piece of fabric, and then we're going to put a pin in to match that first with our pin heads out. So remember, just a little bite of that fabric. Then we're going to find our second notch and we're going to put those two together, and we're going to put our pin in at that point. Just again, just a little bite, and then we're going to go down to the hem, and then we're going to put a pin in at the hem. I think sometimes finding your bearings on these pattern pieces, it's just a fabric jigsaw really, isn't it? And trying to put it all together. So then let's put some more pins up along this skirt then, because that's going to sit nice and neatly and we can get that done, and that'll feel like we're getting somewhere. So again, just a really small amount that I'm just taking a bite out of the fabric. It helps just hold it all together, and use as many pins as you need. So it just means you stop and start, but if you've got the needle in the work, then you won't be able to tell on the finished garment that you've stopped and started, so you don't need to worry, nobody else will know. So then just where this curve is here, it's just wanting to balloon out. So I just go into the middle and just push the fibres down against each other so you've got the same amount either side, and put a pin in the middle. And if you need to, you can go ahead then and put a pin either side. I think that'll be enough for me. And then I'm now going to fold the other side across so that we're getting most of that front edge in, but you're still going to end up with a little noggin at the top. Hold it like that. Well, does that help to show you? Got a little bit of the front panel out there. This is the front and this is the front panel. So I'm just leaving a little bit proud when I pin at the top. But it is only a small amount. It's not even 1/4 of an inch. It's probably only 1/8 of an inch that is proud. Just to get that to sit nicely. And then I'm just going to, because that edge there wants to just pull out, I'm just going to pull those edges together and put another pin in just there. Just making sure we're kind of halfway between the two, and that will help hold those together. So quite a few pins again, but we're working with velvet, so it's all needed and all necessary, and you use as many as you need. And then we're going to take this to the sewing machine again, and we'll start off at the top and then we'll come down. The second one I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to turn them so that they're right sides together. I'm going to match up those notches first, and that's what I find, get those match points right on top of each other first and put your pins in. And then we're going to then move down the skirt and pin that together. But you don't need to see that, because you can just rewind the video just to see what I did with that. But the second one I'm going to do exactly the same, so it gives us a left and a right front for this coat. Okay, so I'm starting again with my curviest side down. You've just got to be careful, because can you see how this is all wanting to fold back into itself? That's why when we get started, we just take a few moments just to straighten this out, just to make sure that we've got everything lying all flat. Let me pop on that on there with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Hold on to my threads. Foot pedal. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. And then forward again, and then needle in the work. And then we can work hands free. Let's take out that first pin. And I'm just going to make sure that I've just got some little pressure on the underneath of that panel. Raw edges are together, and I'm just making sure I'm straight on the edge, so I'm not sewing in any puckers into that seam. To come down to the edge, just stop and just take that pin down, needle up, and let's just straighten that fabric out a little bit. And then round we go a bit more. Pin out. Needle up and just pull that fabric back a little bit. I can see my raw edges aren't quite together on the seam. And if you've got an awl, which is one of these, which is a pointy tool, they're really helpful for just keeping those raw edges together, because they can get in closer and safer than your fingers can. And just holding that in place as you go along. Just remember to stop for your pins, so you can damage the timing of your machine if you don't. And start going down the skirt seam. I'm going to reverse at the end. We'll have a little inspection so you can see. So again, I've just got a little bit of my fabric down on the edge of my, can you see on the edge just there? So I'll probably just undo those stitches and just take that edge back. It's just so easy for it to get caught underneath. Let's do that. Put my glasses on because I'll need it for this thread. So I'm going to go to the first place that is actually caught over and find my stitch at that point and just go through that stitch, and then we can start to ease the fabric back underneath without pulling on it too much, and just take those stitches out, just in case you've done the same. If you've not, if yours is all good, then just move ahead onto the next one and just sew your next one. So that's enough. So I'm just going to put it back in the machine so that edge is on the top of my stitching. Make sure I've gone through all the stitches I need to take out. It doesn't make it bulky at that point. And so long as I start a little bit further back into the stitching, it won't matter then that I've not reversed, because I don't want to reverse on this little edge because I think it'll make the seam bulky. So I'm going to line up my needle with the edge that I've just stitched, a little few millimetres, and then come up to the top, and I can reverse on the very top edge, but not on this part of this seam. So I've just corrected that little bit where it had gone wrong. Okay, and then we can open it out, and we've got a lovely princess seam. Can you see that curve in that seam just beautifully there? So now we're going to do the same thing that we've done before. We're going to snip through our seam allowance up to but not through our stitch line, just to help these seams lie flat. Nice sound, isn't it, when you hear that snipping noise? And then we'll take this to the press mat, and I'll open these seam allowances up and just press those flat all the way down. And then I'm going to repeat exactly the same for my second side. So if you want to do the same, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next bit. Okay, so here we've got one front, all pressed and ready to go, and there's the other front, all pressed and ready to go, and there we've got our back all pressed and ready to go. So let's just keep all those pieces together, because the next thing we're going to need now is our final front facing pieces. So let's take all of the pins out for these, and we're also going to need our back neck facing as well. So these are going to be our facing pieces. So the first thing I suggest that we do is open out this front facing so that we've got the two neckline pieces together. So not the start of the armhole, it's actually the neckline that we've got together with those two straight fronts together, not the curved edge of the skirt. Then what we can do is take our back neck piecing, and I've put a little notch, don't forget, at the centre back. We're going to open that out so that it's one piece, but then I want you to turn it over so the right side is down and offer it up to your back pieces, because the two edges on the back of the facing there will match up with your two shoulder points. So once we've got that matched, let's just put, and I always put two pins. It's tempting to put one pin in the centre, but your fabric piece can still twist on you if you do that. So if you put one at the start and one at the finish, it just keeps it straight. And then depending on whether you want to sew one first or you're happy to do two together, you can go on and sew and pin the other one into place should you wish, or just sew one first and then come back and sew on the other. So this is going to be our facing piece, which is going to start to do our lining. If you were wanting to do the lining, you would still have these front facing pieces, but then you would do your side panels and your back panel for your skirt and your two side back panels, you do those in a lining fabric as well. So not instead of, you do that as well. So you're almost making a complete coat again of what you've already done here, but whereas on the front here, I'd keep that as the velvet, but the side panels, all four of the side panels would be in lining fabric, and you'd have an extra back panel in lining, and I'd make them all up the same way using your lining fabric, but these front one here I would keep as being your fabric, and on your lining edges here, your back facing, I would still keep this one in velvet, but I would cut out the whole of the back in lining fabric, and then I would attach this back neck facing on top of the lining. It sounds a bit complicated. If you've watched, now what video did I do this with? I've done a video on a face lining for a cashmerette dress, which is a ladies wear dress, but the principle is the same. To do a faced lining, that's what you would be doing. So that's what I would do. So let's ignore that bit if you're a beginner, just carry on with what I'm actually doing. But that was just a tip if you wanted to make it all fully lined. So let's go to our sewing machine again. I'm just going to sew across these shoulder seams now at 1/4 inch, just to hold those in place. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work. Take our pin out and carry across. Taking our pin out as we go, and just reverse at the other side of that one. And let's just undo that. That's why I'm saying you can do it in 2 passes if you want. You can do one, just get one stitched on first and then go and do the other one. I pinned mine at the same time. Just make sure everything's all just nicely folded out so that you're not going to, because it's a thicker fabric, so it's easy for things to get folded underneath. Just rewind, rewind, reverse. Same on this side as well, just reverse that. Okay. I'm going to take those threads off. Oops. Not the camera, and then on these I would just press these seams open as well on the edge just here, just to keep those nice and neat. But that's gives us when you put this down right sides up, you'll see you've got your neckline and you've got the back of the neck there all as one piece then once that's all done. And that's what you want to have. So if you want to get yourself to that stage, I'll have a quick look at the instructions next to see what we're doing, but I suspect we're probably working on the collar next, I would have thought, and then we'll take it from there. Getting ahead of myself before we sew our collars to do our collar. So get your back piece first and get one front piece and the other front piece, and your front pieces need to be facing down so you've got right sides together with your back. Just keep that out of the way so you can see. And then where we've got the arm going down to the lower side seam, that's what wants to match up. So just make sure that your armholes are going to kind of give you the same shape on both sides. And then once you've got that in place, we're just going to do these shoulder seams as well. Just put a pin on either side. I always put 2 in on this kind of small seam. Just that small bite of the fabric just to hold it nice and precisely. It doesn't want to go in for me. And then let's do the other one as well. So you're just wanting to make sure that before you sew this, you've got your seams on the front printer seams coming into the centre and then going down, and you've got your nice scoopy neckline, because it's very easy to get the shorter armhole edge mixed up with the long neckline edge. So if you think about that lovely big shawl collar coming all the way down this neckline, that's what we want there, and that straight edge all the way down. Whereas on this side we've got the princess seam is cutting into the armhole edge, so you just need to make sure you get your right bit correct.
for there. Just rewind if I've managed to confuse you somewhere in all of that. So just pin those together. Hopefully I don't lose too many of you along the way. Hopefully you can keep up with what I'm doing and I can give you enough pointers that it all makes sense. If you're not sure, just fold this out and have a look, and you should see that you've got your nice curved edge, and all of your armhole edges have got your princess seams on. So you've got princess seam there and princess seam there, so they're kind of coordinating with each other, and here, and then on this neckline edge here we've got no seam coming into that neckline edge at all, so that's how you'll know you're right. Okay, onto the machine, and just as we did for the facing, let's just sew these together at the top here. Just make sure it's not folded over underneath, and just having those 2 pins just stops that fabric from twisting on you when you're trying to sew it. And then whilst we're pressing our shoulder seams for our facings, we can actually press the shoulder seams for our main jacket open as well. So they're just going to press open just like that on our machine. And we're starting to get the start of a coat coming together, look. It is starting to come together, isn't it? Okay, so let me just go and press those shoulder seams open, and I might just... Well, something that I tend to do sometimes is just put a couple of little stitches just to hold those seam allowances out. Because if they fold over all one side, they get too bulky. Let's do that. I'll tell you what, we'll do that first. So if I put the right side of my fabric down onto the sewing machine bed, you've got this seam allowance open here, and literally it's got to be within the seam allowance that you are going to be using, so only about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. I just put a few stitches through, and it just holds that seam allowance down so that it stays and doesn't fold up for you. Just do that one side, and then it is an extra step, and no, you don't have to do it if you're happy to move on, but sometimes it just helps to keep everything where it should be. No need to reverse or anything like that, you're literally just going to put a couple of stitches through. And if you keep it in the seam allowance, you can see how that's now tacked down, that seam allowance is tacked down. It just means it can't flick open whilst we're working with the sleeves or with the collar and make it bulky for us. So let me just do that on the other side. So the final thing that we have to do with our facing is this outer edge of the facing around here. So if we pop this down so the right sides are up onto our board here, this outer edge here, so you might think you want to do this side here with the inner edge, but that's going to be attached onto the inside of the coat, so it's not that edge. So go to the outer edge, the outside edges, and it's put a pin in if you just need to remind yourself which edge you're going to be zigzagging, because that's always helpful, isn't it, just to put a pin in the seam allowance just so that you remember. And just around the back here as well. And then we're going to take our zigzag stitch or your overlocker, depending on what you've got, and we're going to stitch all the way around here. We're going to pivot here and go all the way around the back of the neck to the edge of the sleeve there, and then all the way down. If you are lining your garment and you've got your side pieces on here, you don't need to neaten these edges at all. You might want to just neaten the back edge of your neck, because that will sit on around your shoulders, so just from those points there. But if you are unlining your jacket, you want to go all the way around. So let's get a zigzag stitch going on our machine. So that for me is a number 8 stitch, and it's on a 5 width and it's on a 2 distance. So let's just try that and see how that goes, because we don't want it to bunch up. I'm going to let my tension off slightly on my machine as well, so it doesn't bunch up too quickly. And then let's just see how we get on here. Remember to take my pin out, needle in the work. So I know on the right edge because of that pin. And if we're careful, it's not bunching it in, it's just giving it that nice edge. Right, so let's carry on with this. So if you have to pivot, so if you're pivoting on a zigzag, you always finish with your needle in your fabric as you're pivoting, just to change direction slightly. Just going to use my awl again just to help me get around this section here. I'm just putting pressure on the fabric with my 2 fingers, and that's just enabling the fabric just to spin around that curve. Just pivot slightly just here. That's it, pivoting the work again, and then carry on down this side here. Machine had a hissy fit in the middle there, but hopefully it's not going to, no, got a bit of a snag, but it shouldn't affect the finished garment because it's going to be on the inside anyway. Take my starting and finishing threads off, take my machine off my zigzag, and while we're here, remember to tighten up your tension again so that you can't start sewing and forget to do that. So I've just got that zigzagged edge all the way around there just to neaten that for when that's all laying nicely. Okay, we're on to the collar next. So if you want to find your pieces for your fur and for your undercollar, and we'll get started.